It's a great honor for me to be invited here and have a speech today. Actually, before I came here, and if you look at the Chinese newspaper, almost all the headlines regarding the EU crisis. So people are just wondering what's going on here and what's going to happen next. Because EU is actually the biggest exportation target market for China right now. And China, they have right now for the Chinese economy, it hire about 120 million people in this area. So if the EU market does not work, or if the EU problem cannot be solved quickly, then probably after a few years, probably next year, the Chinese economy will drop like 2 to 3%. So it's a big issue for everybody in China to worry about. So for my speech today, I always ask myself a question: what's behind the money? If we're talking about the money crisis right now. For example, if we take about one paper money like a US dollar, $100, we should ask ourselves, what's behind this paper money? What's the real asset behind that? I think the paper money is only served as a claim to the real asset. It's not asset itself. It's just a claim or receipt of some real asset. So before 1971, I think what's behind this paper money is gold. And after 1971, it has been replaced by the U.S. debt, the government debt, treasury debt. I think the same thing happened in the euro. If you take one bill of the 1 euro or 100 euro, what's behind that? It's a 17 sovereign countries debt. So that's very interesting, since we know the value of the gold is stable, but the debt of the government is not. The government always has some possibility to default. So if the government can keep the promise, then the receipt or the money you hold has some value. Otherwise, it's going to lose the value. I think that's a real fundamental problem caused the current crisis. So after 1971, I think the whole world switched the economic growth model from like investment oriented model to the debt-driven model. I think that's the biggest problem for not only US but also for the European countries. In year 2008, Neil Ferguson, a professor from Harvard, he coined a term which is very interesting. He called this term China America. He imagined a country named China America. The east part of this country, the Chinese people, they produce the products, spending less, consuming less, and saving a lot of money. But the west part of the country, the U.S. people, they just enjoy the life, spend more and save less. So eventually, those two parts of the economy, which has led to a very imbalanced situation. The Chinese economy export two kinds of the products: the products made in China and the national saving of the Chinese people. So the product made in China keep the U.S. inflation low, so people can enjoy their life. And the national saving export from China to U.S. keep the credit very cheap. So people can borrow money in the very low interest rate. So this just stimulates the bubble, the asset bubble, particularly in the real estate area. So eventually we see the very interesting balance happening in the U.S. and the China. The Chinese people working hard, save the money, and then export the products to the U.S. And during this process, the Chinese people also use their savings to buy the U.S. bond. So the money just flow from China to the U.S. And in the United States, people enjoy the cheap product, and the more the Chinese savings flow to the U.S., the higher the asset price will be. And eventually Wall Street gurus, those guys create some magic financial tools to catch up those appreciation of the assets, like equity loan, like credit line of credit. So it makes the people, like the United States consumers, they can cash out those appreciation of the assets. So they don't have to save. They don't have to have their own bank savings anymore. So that caused the problem because the asset price in the United States is getting higher and higher, but at the same time, so does the debt level. All the assets, behind the asset is the debt. When you buy the very expensive house, you have to borrow more. So that means you're accumulating your debt level higher and higher. So eventually, if this debt accumulation, the growth rate of the debt is faster than the national income, then you will have the disaster or default guarantee. So that's why we have this financial crisis starting from the United States. So I think the similar problem happened in the EU as well. In the European Union, I think there are two parts of the European Union, the north part and the south part. The north part, like Germany and other European countries, they are like China, they produce more, and they are saving more. They have the surplus, the trade surplus. But in the southern part of the EU, the situation is more like the United States. After they joined the EU, they enjoyed the low interest rate. By using that, they not invest those money into the manufacturing to make their competition stronger, but they use those money to stimulate the asset bubble. So you will see the real estate price in the southern part getting higher and higher, and it's just the same situation in the United States. When you have the more debt and it grows faster than the national income, then sooner or later this bubble can burst. So that's what we saw right now. So the two money cycling across the Pacific and Atlantic both broke. Actually, in the United States and China, the money circulation from the Chinese saving to the United States, they stopped. And in the European, I think there's a similar problem. The North European countries produce the products, they export their savings. So the south part, they can enjoy the cheap consumer products, at the same time they can enjoy the cheap credit. But those good days, they just ended. So right now, the United States, they have some other tool to solve their problem because the US dollar is a world currency. So people have to use the US dollar to do the trade settlement. So every time when the United States, they push money out of the border, those money serve as actually credit base for all over the world. So when that happens, for example, if the U.S. pushes their money outside of their border, all the other countries will have the liquidity, and based on that, they can create their own national credit based on the U.S. dollar. So we will see the booming everywhere. But right now, I think the United States, they just enter to another cycle. They just suck in all the dollar from the outside world. They're trying to export more. That means you have to pay dollar to the U.S. manufacturing, so the U.S. dollar will flow back to the United States. In that case, the other place the other countries, they will face the problem because of the United States dollar will become more and more scarcity. So if that happens, the other country will face problem, like the bubble burst, like the financial crisis, something like that will happen in other countries. But so the United States, because of the the dollar special status, they can solve their problem probably in several years. But in the EU, I think the situation is complicated because of the southern part of the EU countries. They don't have the money to devalue their currency. So how could you compete with the German products if you cannot devalue the lira or other local currencies anymore? So in that case, I think the recovery is going to take a much longer time than what we thought. So if that's the case, it's going to cause a bigger problem for like China and Asian countries. Right now in China, just like I mentioned, exportation sections hire like 120 million jobs directly and indirectly. Since September of this year, we see all the orders from the EU dropped like 23%, which is a big drop, and orders from US dropped 33%. If that keep going, then next year, probably first quarter to second quarter, the Chinese economy is going to drop probably 1 to 2%. Probably next half of the year will drop 2 to 3%, which can the whole country will just evolving to just get into the big trouble. I mean, in the next year, probably half of the next year. So right now, the Chinese economy, they use emerging markets, the order from emerging markets to replace EU and the United States orders. But because of the emerging markets, they also depend on the EU and the United States and Japan to make their economy working. So if the United States and the European Union cannot solve the problem in 2 years or 3 years, then I think the whole world gonna lose the 10 years of the development. So that's the major concern for the Chinese government, and probably all the corporations, they worry about that right now. So what the Asian countries should learn from the EU crisis, I think probably for the European guys, you just get used to the peace after World War II. So nobody value, I think, the peace solutions after World War II. I think probably the EU creates the most, the best example for the whole human being. That if you put something to this super sovereignty entity, then a lot of problems can be solved. Like back to 60 years ago, the French and Germans, they sit together and they try to find a solution to solve the coal and steel problem between those two countries. I think that created a very great example for the human being. I think probably the EU is the best example in the human being's history to solve the conflicts between the national countries because of the sovereign issues, something like that. So I think the biggest lesson which the Asian countries should learn from the EU example is try to open the mind, get rid of some old concept of the sovereignty of the country. For example, right now the biggest risk in the Asian economy is not the importation or unemployment, stuff like that. I think it's a war. Maybe the European people, they just forget about this risk, but in the Asian countries, it's a real risk right now. Because, for example, some conflicts between China and Japan regarding some small islands in the East Ocean, or the Chinese government has some problem with Southeastern Asian countries. regarding South China Sea's sovereignty claims. Those can be, those can trigger the war probably next month, probably next week, we don't know. So I think that's the biggest problem and biggest risk in the whole Asian area. That problem must be fixed. So I think the EU serves as a very good example. So in my fourth book, I propose a new idea. Why don't the Chinese people and other Asian people learn from the EU example? We can put all the oil reserve underneath those conflict areas. We can put those assets into the super sovereignty entity, like the Asian oil unit, something like that. And use that as a starting point. And the issue like the Asian Euro fund to collect money and to invest to such projects. And then from there move to the Asian common market and eventually probably unify the Asian currency. So I think if we learn from the EU, there are a lot of things the Chinese people can learn and the Asian people can learn from the current crisis and the EU example. So we're very concerned about what's going on in the EU. I hope the EU can solve the problem and serve as a very good example for all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. One question for me. What you're saying, your vision of Asian Union, we have EU in Europe, and that would be AU, Asian Union. It's somewhere on the line with the philosophy of the Catholic Church of creating international government. If there was an international government that would cover all of the world, would you consider a good idea for China to be part of that in the common currency system, or you would rather opt out as Britons do opt out from the monetary system?
I think the success of the EU is because of the European countries share the common cultural and religious background. I think in the Asian country we also share some like a confusion. It's not religion, but it's a common cultural tradition. So people respect the family, they respect the older generation. So self-discipline, something like that. So I think all the monetary union or political union, they must based on some common things, or either religious common background or the cultural common background. So I think probably in the future the cultural common background can serve as a basic value common point for all the countries in Asia.
Would you see the perspective of creating a global government to sort of universalize or find a common denominator for all cultures? And
yes, actually, in my fourth book, I propose to unify Asian money. I think that's a future trend. I think probably in the future we will see the US dollar, the euro, and probably the unified Asian money, and probably other like Latin America unified money. So I think that's a future trend of the human being history. So if that's a trend, if you just ignore that, I think that's not very smart. I think if you know that's a trend, then try to make yourself lead off that trend. I think that's a better idea. So I think Probably in China, most people, they just don't think that it's realistic to have the unified the Asian money, but sooner or later they will realize that's the future way to go.
Thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo.